An elderly woman with silver hair tied in a bun entered the Jiu-Jitsu academy. Kimono neatly pressed. "Get out, Grandma," sneered Coach Jackson, causing laughter throughout the class. But when he challenged Edith Simmons to spar, nobody expected what happened next. Least of all him. Edith Simmons carefully folded her white kimono and placed it in her weather gym bag. At 72, her movements were deliberate but precise, a lifetime of discipline evident in every gesture. She ran her fingers over the faded black belt, its frayed edges, telling stories of for decades on the mat. The morning light filtered through her modest apartment's windows. She had moved to this suburban community just 3 weeks ago following the death of her husband. Starting over wasn't easy, but Edith had never been one to surrender to circumstances. After unpacking the essentials and arranging her new living space, there was only one thing left to do: find a place to continue her lifelong practice. "Your joints aren't getting any younger, Eddie," she muttered to herself, wincing slightly as she stood. Her doctor had been clear: keep moving or start declining. For Edith, there had never been any question about which path she'd choose. She checked her reflection in the mirror, silver hair neatly pulled back in a practical bun, face lined with experience, eyes still sharp and alert. She nodded at herself, a silent affirmation she'd given before every training session since 1980, when she'd first stepped onto a mat at the age of 28. Few people knew about Edith's remarkable journey in Jiu-Jitsu. She'd trained under Master Takahashi for 15 years before his passing, earning her black belt when women in the sport were rarities, while raising 2 children and supporting her husband's career as a school principal. She'd quietly continued her training, eventually becoming a secondary black belt. It wasn't something she broadcast. Edith had never been one to boast, but the knowledge lived in her muscles, in her reflexes, in the quiet confidence with which she moved through the world. First day at a new dojo, she reminded herself, grabbing her car keys, just like riding a bicycle. The drive to Elite Martial Arts Academy took only 15 minutes. From the outside, the facility looked impressive. Large windows, modern signage, a spacious parking lot filled with expensive vehicles. Edith's modest sedan seemed out of place among the shiny SUVs and sports cars. She observed several young men and women entering the building, most in their 20s and 30s, all looking fit and athletic in their branded gym wear. Edith adjusted her plain white kimono one last time before exiting her car. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and a skeptical expression, looked up as Edith approached the front desk. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she doubted the elderly woman had arrived at the right place. "Yes, I'm interested in joining your jiu-jitsu program," Edith replied, her voice clear and unwavering. The receptionist's eyebrows rose slightly. "Our adult classes are quite intensive. Perhaps you'd be interested in our senior yoga sessions on Tuesday mornings." Edith smiled patiently. "I've been practicing jiu-jitsu for over 40 years, dear. I'm looking for a place to continue my training." A flicker of disbelief crossed the receptionist's face, but she maintained her professional demeanor. "Well, we do have an open mat session starting in 15 minutes. New students can observe and then speak with one of our instructors about placement." "That sounds perfect," Edith replied. "You'll need to sign these waivers." The receptionist slid several forms across the counter. "And Coach Jackson will evaluate your abilities." Edith signed the papers with a steady hand, ignoring the receptionist's barely concealed skepticism. As she walked toward the changing area, she could feel the young woman's eyes following her, no doubt wondering what an old lady was doing in a competitive jiu-jitsu academy. Edith smiled to herself. It certainly wouldn't be the first time she'd been underestimated. The main training floor at Elite Martial Arts Academy was impressive, spacious, well lit with state-of-the-art equipment and pristine mats. About 20 students were already warming up, most wearing blue or white kimonos with colored belts indicating various ranks. Their movements were sharp, energetic, and accompanied by the characteristic sounds of bare feet pivoting on mats and controlled breathing. Edith stood at the edge of the training area, taking in the scene with an experienced eye. The techniques being practiced were familiar, fundamentals she had drilled thousands of times. She noted the clean execution, the attentive coaching, and the respectful atmosphere. It seemed like a solid academy, exactly what she'd been hoping to find. Then she spotted him, the head instructor. Coach Adam Jackson was in his mid-30s, tall and powerfully built with a confident stride that bordered on arrogance. His blue kimono was emblazoned with competition patches, and his black belt was tied with meticulous precision around his waist. He moved through the room, correcting stances, demonstrating techniques, and receiving nods of difference from his students. When Jackson's gaze finally landed on Edith, he froze momentarily. His expression shifted from surprise to something resembling amusement. He said something to a nearby student, a muscular young man with a purple belt, who glanced at Edith and snickered, undeterred. Edith stepped onto the mat and bowed, following traditional dojo etiquette. The chatter in the room gradually diminished as more students noticed the elderly woman in a white kimono. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Coach Jackson called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "I think you might have wandered into the wrong class. Senior Tai Kai is in the small studio down the hall." A wave of suppressed laughter rippled through the room. Edith remained composed, her expression neutral. "I'm here for the Jiu-Jitsu class," she replied, her voice clear and steady. "I recently moved to town and I'm looking for a new place to train." Jackson exchanged glances with several of his senior students, his smile widening. "Train at your age." He made no attempt to hide his incredulity. "No offense, ma'am, but Jiu-Jitsu is a physically demanding combat sport. We focus on competition-level training here. I'm aware of what Jiu-Jitsu involves." Edith replied calmly, "I've been practicing since 1980. This elicited more muffled laughter from the class. Jackson's smile turned condescending. "Look, Grandma," he said, emphasizing the word to draw more snickers from his students. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this isn't a beginner-friendly environment. We don't have time to teach basics to someone who might hurt themselves." Edith remained still, her eyes fixed on Jackson. "I understand your concern, but I assure you I can manage. Can you even get up from the ground without help?" called out one of the blue belts, causing another wave of laughter. Jackson raised his hand, silencing the class, though his own amusement was evident. "What belt do you claim to be?" he asked, emphasizing claim with obvious skepticism. "I don't claim anything," Edith replied, unruffled by his tone. "I earned my second-degree black belt under Master Hiroshi Takahashi in 1995. The name meant nothing to most of the students, but Jackson's expression flickered momentarily. Takahashi was a legendary figure in certain circles, though he had never sought mainstream recognition. Well, Jackson recovered quickly, his smirk returning. "I'm sure things were different back then. Standards have evolved considerably." He gestured toward the door with exaggerated courtesy. "Why don't you observe today's class from the visitors area? That might help you decide if this is really suitable for someone of your experience." The dismissal was clear, delivered with a veneer of professional concern that couldn't quite mask the underlying mockery. Several students were openly grinning now, clearly enjoying the spectacle of the old woman being put in her place. But Edith Simmons hadn't spent for decades on the mat to be dismissed so easily. "I didn't come to watch," Edith said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that momentarily silenced the room. "I came to train." Coach Jackson's patronizing smile faltered slightly. He hadn't expected push back from the elderly woman. Around the room, students exchanged glances, their amusement now tinged with curiosity. "Ma'am," Jackson began, his tone deliberately patient, as if explaining something to a child. "We have insurance regulations and safety protocols. I can't just let someone of your condition join an advanced class without proper assessment." Edith nodded. "That's reasonable. Assess me then." A few snickers broke out among the students. Jackson crossed his arms, his smirk returning. He was clearly enjoying having an audience for this unusual encounter. "You want me to assess you?" he asked, raising an eyebrow theatrically. "Right now?" "That's why I'm here," Edith replied simply. Jackson turned to his class with an exaggerated shrug, playing to the crowd. "Well, folks, looks like we're changing today's lesson plan. Apparently, we need to conduct a special evaluation." He gestured to a young man wearing a blue belt. "Mike, come here. I need you to help with a demonstration." Mike stepped forward, grinning as Jackson turned back to Edith. "This is Mike Peterson, one of our intermediate students. If you're serious about training here, show us you can handle a basic exchange with him." Edith met Jackson's gaze steadily. "I'd prefer to work with you, Coach Jackson." The room went completely silent. Someone in the back let out a low "Oh," that was quickly hushed. Jackson's expression hardened, the mocking humor replaced by something colder. "May?" he asked, his voice losing its theatrical quality. "You want to roll with me? If you're going to evaluate my abilities, it should be done properly," Edith said calmly. "You're the head instructor, aren't you?" The challenge hung in the air. Jackson was trapped. Refuge, and he'd lose face in front of his students, and he'd have to physically engage with a woman old enough to be his grandmother. Either way, the dynamic had shifted unexpectedly. After a moment's hesitation, Jackson's arrogance reasserted itself. This would be an opportunity to show his students how to handle an awkward situation professionally. He would go easy on the old lady, demonstrate a few basic moves, and firmly but kindly show her why this wasn't the place for her. "Fine," he said, his confident smile returning. "We'll do a light demonstration roll, 3 minutes, just to assess your movement." He turned to the class. "Everyone clear the center mat, please." As the students formed a circle round the main training area, Jackson removed his instructor's patch and laid it aside, making a show of his preparation. Edith quietly took her position on the mat, her movements unhurried, but surprisingly fluid for someone her age. "I'll go very light," Jackson announced loudly for the benefit of his audience. "Just basic positions, no submissions." "Ready, Mrs. Simmons," Edith replied. "Edith Simmons. And I'm ready when you are, Coach." The trap was set. "Begin," Jackson called out. Dropping into a traditional starting stance, the room grew quiet, all eyes fixed on the unusual pair at the center of the mat. Jackson circled slowly, his movements deliberately measured, a performance of restraint for his watching students. "We'll just work on some basic positioning," he explained loudly, clearly playing to his audience. "In Jiu-Jitsu, we learn to use leverage rather than strength, which makes it accessible to all body types." And he reached for Edith's sleeve, intending to demonstrate a simple grip technique. What happened next occurred so quickly that many students would later disagree about the exact sequence. As Jackson's hand made contact with her kimono, Edith shifted her weight almost imperceptibly. Her hand closed over his wrist with surprising firmness. Before Jackson could process what was happening, she had executed a perfect sleeve drag, disrupting his balance and forcing him to step forward to compensate. It was a textbook setup, and Jackson walked right into it. In the next instant, Edith dropped to a seated position, her legs shooting forward between Jackson's, hooking his ankle. Simultaneously, her grip transferred from his sleeve to his collar, pulling him forward as her hip rotated. The movement was fluid, precise, and devastatingly effective. Jackson, caught completely off guard, toppled forward. By the time his knees hit the mat, Edith had already transitioned, securing a technical mount position that number 72-year-old should have been capable of achieving. Against a black belt in his prime, a collective gasp swept through the room. "What the?" Jackson started, his composure cracking as he attempted to regain control. But Edith was already advancing to the next phase. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, establishing grips that were impossible to break without proper technique. Jackson, still processing what was happening, made the novice mistake of pushing against her directly, exactly what a skilled practitioner would anticipate. Edith's response was immediate and flawless. She redirected his energy, creating an opening for a classic armbar transition. Jackson recognized the danger too late, attempting to stack and pass, but finding himself caught in a perfectly executed trap. The submission was locked in before he could mount a proper defense, his arm extended in Edith's precise control, the pressure increasing steadily until he had no choice. "Tap," Jackson gasped, slapping the mat with his free hand. The entire exchange had lasted less than 10 seconds. Silence descended on the academy. Students stood frozen, mouths open in astonishment. The elderly woman had just submitted their intimidating head coach. with a sequence so clean it could have been filmed for an instructional video. Edith released her hold immediately and rose to her feet with surprising agility. She straightened her kimono and bowed respectfully to Jackson, who remained kneeling on the mat, his expression a mixture of shock and confusion. "Thank you for the assessment opportunity, Coach Jackson," she said calmly. "I hope that addresses your concerns about my abilities." No one in the room made a sound. The impossible had just happened, and they had all witnessed it. Jackson slowly got to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment and confusion. The studio remained eerily silent. The students too stunned to even whisper among themselves. The coach's carefully cultivated image of invincibility had just been shattered in seconds. "Who are you?" he finally managed, his voice quieter now, the mockery completely gone. "Really?" Edith adjusted her belt calmly. "I told you." Edith Simmons, secondary black belt under Master Takahashi. One of the older students stepped forward, recognition dawning on his face. "Wait, Takahashi isn't the Takahashi who trained those champions in the 9 South, and you're that Edith Simmons?" Edith nodded modestly. "I was just one of his students." "One of his students," the man continued, excitement creeping into his voice. "You were his top female competitor. I remember reading about you in old martial arts journals. Didn't you win the Eastern Regional Championships 3 times? A murmur spread through the class. Jackson's expression shifted from embarrassment to dawning realization. "That was a long time ago." Edith said simply, "I never sought the spotlight. The practice itself was always what mattered to me." Jackson cleared his throat, visibly struggling to regain his composure. His pride was wounded, but years of training had taught him something about humility, even if he didn't always practice it. "Mrs. Simmons," he said, bowing formally, "I owe you an apology. My behavior was disrespectful and unbecoming of an instructor." Edith acknowledged his apology with a slight nod. "We all make judgments based on appearances," says Coach Jackson. "It's a natural human tendency. What matters is our willingness to revise those judgments when presented with new information." A young woman with a purple belt stepped forward. "Ma'am, that armbar transition was incredible. Would you be willing to show us that again?" Edith turned to Jackson, raising an eyebrow in question. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "I think we could all learn something today," he admitted, his voice carrying a new note of genuine respect. "If Mrs. Simmons is willing." For the next hour, what had been planned as a regular training session transformed into an impromptu master class. Edith demonstrated techniques with a precision born from decades of consistent practice. Her movements weren't as fast as they once had been, but her timing and leverage were impeccable. Most remarkable to the students was her ability to explain the subtle details that made each technique effective. The slight angle adjustment that increased control, the proper timing of weight distribution, the importance of patience in transition moments. Jackson, to his credit, participated fully, asking thoughtful questions and helping demonstrate positions when needed. His initial humiliation gradually gave way to genuine appreciation as he recognized the wealth of knowledge Edith possessed. "In my 44 years of practice," Edith explained as they worked through a complicated guard passage, "I've learned that Jiu-Jitsu isn't about power or speed. Those fade with time. It's about understanding principles that never change: leverage, timing, balance, and most importantly, respect for both your opponent and yourself." The students listened with rapt attention, their previous mockery forgotten. Something rare and valuable had entered their dojo, and they knew it. As the class wound down, the energy in the room had transformed completely. Students who had snickered at Edith's arrival now approached her with questions, each interaction colored with newfound respect. She answered patiently, offering insights without condescension, sharing her extensive knowledge generously. Jackson watched from the edge of the mat, his expression thoughtful. When the last student had finished speaking with Edith, he approached her again. "Mrs. Simmons," he began, his voice lacking the false confidence that had characterized their first interaction. "I'd like to offer you a position here at Elite." Edith raised an eyebrow, surprised by the proposal. "We have several women's classes and youth programs that would benefit tremendously from your experience," Jackson continued. "Your technical knowledge is exceptional. I didn't come here looking for employment, Coach Jackson, Edith replied. I simply wanted to find a place to continue my own practice. Jackson nodded. Of course, you'd have full access to our facilities whenever you wish, but I hope you'll consider sharing your knowledge as well. Teaching even just one class a week would be invaluable to our students. Edith considered the offer. She hadn't expected this outcome when she'd walked through the doors earlier that day. Her plan had simply been to find a space where she could maintain her practice, keep her body moving, and perhaps find a new community in this town where she was starting over. I'll think about it, she said finally, but I have one condition if I'm to train here regularly. Name it. Jackson replied immediately. The dojo must be a place of respect for everyone who walks through that door, regardless of their age, gender, or appearance. Her eyes held his steadily. What happened today should never happen to anyone else who comes here to learn. Jackson nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke with surprising grace. That's a principle I should have been upholding all along. Consider it a promise. As Edith gathered her things to leave, several students bowed to her formally, a gesture of respect rarely offered to anyone besides the head instructor. See you Thursday, Sensei Simmons? Asked the young woman with the purple belt, her tone hopeful. Edith smiled. Thursday would be fine. As she walked toward the exit, she noticed a small group of older adults peering curiously through the glass windows of the reception area. They had witnessed parts of her impromptu teaching session and were talking animatedly amongst themselves. The receptionist who had greeted her earlier approached with a sheepish expression. Ma'am, there are several people asking if we offer classes for mature students. They want to know if you'll be teaching. Edith's smile deepened. Perhaps this new chapter would be more interesting than she had anticipated. Tell them to come back on Thursday, she said. We'll see what we can do. 3 months later, Elite Martial Arts Academy had undergone a remarkable transformation. What had once been primarily a training ground for young, competitive athletes had evolved into a more diverse and inclusive community. Twice a week, Edith taught what had become known as the Foundations class, open to practitioners of all ages and experience levels. The emphasis wasn't on athletic prowess or competition preparation, but on the timeless technical aspects of Jiu-Jitsu that Edith had refined over decades. Surprisingly, these sessions became the most well-attended in the Academy's schedule. Younger students discovered that drilling fundamentals under Edith's watchful eye improved their competition performance dramatically. Older practitioners found her methodical approach accessible and effective, allowing them to progress without risking injury. Most significantly, Coach Jackson himself regularly participated in Edith's classes, often serving as her demonstration partner. His initial embarrassment had given way to genuine respect and a hunger to learn from her deep technical knowledge. Mrs. Simmons has forgotten more about pressure distribution than most of us will ever learn, he once told a journalist from a local newspaper who came to write a feature about the unusual teaching partnership. Today, the Academy was hosting a small in-house tournament. Competitors of various ages and belt levels participated with Edith, and Jackson co-judging the matches between divisions. Edith demonstrated key techniques with Jackson's assistance, breaking down the principles that spectators should watch for in the upcoming bouts. Notice how leverage, not strength, creates the submission opportunity, she explained to the attentive audience as she slowly worked through a technical arm bar on Jackson. This is accessible to practitioners of any size or age when executed properly. In the viewing area, several elderly individuals watched with particular interest. They were members of what had become informally known as the Silver Belts, a growing group of seniors who had joined the Academy after hearing about Edith. She's changed everything, remarked one of Elite's longtime instructors to a visitor observing the event. Not just for the older practitioners, but for all of us, she reminded us what matters in Jiu-Jitsu. From the center of the mat, Edith caught sight of a new visitor entering the Academy, an elderly gentleman using a cane, looking hesitant but determined. She smiled, recognizing that same uncertainty she'd felt 3 months earlier. Coach Jackson noticed her gaze and followed it to the newcomer. Without prompting, he walked over to welcome the man personally, guiding him to a seat with a respectful bow. Some lessons, Edith reflected, went far beyond techniques on the mat. If this story touched your heart, remember that appearances can be deceiving and wisdom comes in many forms. Have you ever been underestimated or witnessed someone being judged unfairly? Share your experience in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspirational stories that remind us to look beyond the surface. Let us know where you're watching from and which part of Edith's journey resonated with you most. Until next time, remember, respect is earned, not demanded. And true mastery is shown through actions, not words. The oldest tree in the forest often has the deepest roots.